Well, you probably know the browser because even if you're one of those people that doesn't switch from the default browser when you get a new computer, you will have heard of it. 3.5 billion people around the world use it. That's more than 2/3 of internet users. And if you don't use Chrome or Safari, you probably use a browser built on Chromium. That's an open source code base based on Chrome, which Google releases to the public. Even Edge, the third most popular browser made by Microsoft, is a Chromium browser. The DOJ has asked the federal judge Amit Mehta to order Google to sell Chrome, which is a crucial pillar of its business, even though it's free of charge. Why? Because it's how billions of people make their way onto Google search. Yes, the real monopoly the US justice system has ruled lies in Google's 90% market domination of online search. And search means data, which means money. So if you type into Chrome's search bar to search for something, Google collects all sorts of data on you and uses this to sell advertising. In fact, the only place this is a little bit different is here in the EU, where since an antitrust ruling 6 years ago, Chrome has offered a choice of search engines when you install it. This has supposedly been refined since the Digital Markets Act came into effect a couple of years ago. But let's be frank, it's not made a jot of difference to Google's dominance of search. Its market share has actually increased over the last few years. Turns out it's not that easy to convince people to use another search engine when the phrase Google it has become a verb.
Now, that's not the only demand the DOJ is making.
No, there's a whole host of other demands as well. This is where things get very interesting and quite confusing as to what on earth could happen next. If the DOJ gets its way, for a decade, Google will have to hand out the vast amount of data it collects from users and advertising on search to rivals and potential rivals for free so they can use this data to build better search engines. It won't be able to re-enter the browser market for at least 5 years, and it will have to end its billion-dollar agreements, notably with Apple, but also with smaller players like Mozilla, to make Google the default search engine on their apps. That's what those payouts are for. They will end, and it will be prohibited from acquiring search rivals and will have to divest any such interests it currently owns, including AI companies, which have now made chatbots that are being used in much the same way as search engines. On top of that, a committee appointed by the judge, but paid for by Google, would have to complete access to Google documents, employees, and code to ensure compliance. And if all that fails to restore competition to the search sector, well, Google will have to sell its Android mobile operating system too if the DOJ gets its way. And of course, almost 3/4 of every phone in the world use Android.
And how has Google responded then to all this?
Well, strongly, to put it mildly. They've called it a radical interventionist agenda that would endanger the security and privacy of millions of Americans. You can see the statement here, because it would require disclosure to unknown companies, Americans' personal search queries. Now, even though the proposal calls for data to be released in a secure and private way, they're not buying it. Despite this reaction, I've actually seen some people calling this a pulled punch from the DOJ, leaving plenty of space for Google to push back, both in their counter-proposal that they'll publish next month and at a hearing next April. Then, if there is to be a ruling against Google, there'll inevitably be the appeal. That could last years. And in the case of the last big antitrust trial, that was against Microsoft in the noughties, Microsoft won on appeal.
And do we have an idea of what might happen?
Well, no, to put it simply, but prediction markets currently put it as a 1 in 4, 1 in 3 possibility that Google will have to sell Chrome. Judge Mehta did already rule in favor of the DOJ that Google has an illegal monopoly over search, which would suggest that something should be done. One factor will be how much the DOJ continues to push this same proposal, which could depend on the next Attorney General. It's not Matt Gaetz anymore. We know that much. He's pretty anti-tech, very, very anti-tech, in fact. We'll have to see who the next one is. But in general, Donald Trump's approach to tech in his next administration will be anyone's guess.
I guess the question that remains then is how could the internet change if prosecutors do get their way?
Right, that's the question that spawns so many other questions, right? Who could possibly afford to buy Chrome? It's estimated to cost around $20 billion if it were to be sold now. Who who could buy it that's not already facing antitrust complaints? And will Chromium have to be shut down too? Won't that hurt competition? How would Google release its search data to whom? And how do we choose who'd get to benefit from this? Mozilla, for instance, which I mentioned, they make Firefox. They'd lose most of their revenue. And wouldn't that hurt competition if they were obliterated? But in any case, in some ways, internet search is already changing because of AI, but also because of platforms like TikTok. These things have begun to change the way people have searched entirely. People are increasingly turning to AI chatbots for answers. And in fact, the news site The Information reported this week that OpenAI is making serious steps towards challenging Google by creating a web browser of its by themselves.